Hey guys, tonight we drift into the flickering lamplight of an old monastery. Stone walls sweating in the chill, air thick with the scent of hay, wax, and something faintly sour-sweet. You hear a bell toll in the distance, soft as a heartbeat under moss. A monk shuffles past, his robe whispering against the flagstones, and in his hands he carries a bucket of milk so fresh it still steams. He's not headed to drink it, he's headed to transform it into something holy, practical, and just a little obsessive. You're about to learn why monks, those keepers of prayer and parchment, were also absolute dairy fanatics. And trust me, you probably won't survive this story without craving a midnight snack. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and the local time. I love seeing where my insomniac historians tune in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the dark corridor, following the faint clink of metal against stone. Somewhere nearby, milk is being poured into an enormous cauldron, and a low chant murmurs in the background. The monks move methodically, as though each step of cheese-making is another verse of prayer. And maybe it is. In the medieval world, milk didn't last long. It spoiled faster than a bad confession. So turning it into cheese was both necessity and miracle. The monks, with their strict schedules and isolation, had the perfect conditions for patience. And patience, as it turns out, is the soul of cheese. Imagine this. You're a Benedictine brother in the 11th century, your life ordered by the rule of Saint Benedict. You wake before dawn, pray 7 times a day, and eat simply. Meat is rare, milk is fleeting, and fasting seasons feel eternal. But cheese? Cheese endures. It bridges the gap between deprivation and celebration, between field and faith. Historical records from abbeys like Cluny and Chateau show that monks weren't just dabbling in dairy, they were perfecting it. Their cheese-making became so advanced that noblemen requested wheels by name. You, humble monk, are suddenly part of a silent culinary revolution. The monastery's courtyard glows pale in the moonlight, and you spot the cows, sacred in their own quiet way. They're not owned by individuals, but by the community. The monks milk them by hand each dawn, offering thanks as the warm stream fills the bucket. Ora et labora, they whisper, pray and work. It's not just a motto, it's the rhythm of the monastery. And even in curds and whey, there's theology. Now, you might think monks would be solemn about everything, but rumor has it they joked among themselves that milk is the Lord's test of patience. When it curdled too soon, they called it the devil's sneeze. You smirk, because if anyone could make theology sound like dairy drama, it's a monk with a leaky bucket. The curdling process starts. The milk is warmed and mixed with rennet, a mysterious ingredient harvested from a calf's stomach lining. The monks believed God himself hid the secret of coagulation there, an invisible transformation from liquid to solid, from chaos to order. Historians still argue whether monks discovered rennet through divine accident or animal curiosity, but either way, the miracle stuck. You watch as the mixture thickens. A monk, maybe Brother Peter, presses a hand into the curd, feeling the texture. Too soft, and it'll rot. Too hard, and it won't mature right. He cuts it into cubes with a wooden harp and begins to stir gently, humming a psalm that seems to match the rhythm. Steam rises. It smells earthy and slightly sweet. It's strange, you realize you're witnessing chemistry centuries before the word existed. By torchlight, the curds are drained and packed into molds, wrapped in linen and pressed with stones. Tomorrow, they'll be salted, stacked, and sent to the cellar, where time will finish what faith began. You imagine the wheel, weeks from now, hardening and deepening in flavor, its scent mingling with damp stone and prayer candles. Inside, somewhere between ritual and recipe, cheese became sacred. It wasn't just food, it was metaphor. The curd separating from the whey mirrored the separation of soul from sin. The slow aging process reminded monks of spiritual ripening. And yes, there's an unspoken joke that too much cheese could lead to unholy bloating, a reminder that even holiness has digestive consequences. Outside, the wind hums through the monastery's bell tower. You pull your robe tighter. You can feel centuries of discipline, innovation, and quiet obsession vibrating through this place. Cheese wasn't a side project, it was survival turned spiritual practice. Without refrigeration, every drop of milk mattered. Monks recorded weather patterns, tested different herbs for preservation, even noted the taste differences between morning and evening milk. That's right, they were early food scientists, long before Michelin stars were a thing. A quick quirky fact floats into your mind. In some monasteries, cheese wheels were stamped with tiny crosses, supposedly to ward off evil spirits that might spoil the batch. Whether that worked or not, nobody questioned it. After all, no one wants to eat demon cheese. You lean against a cold wall, listening to the rhythmic drip of whey into a bucket. The scene feels timeless. Every monastery across Europe, from the damp valleys of Switzerland to the green hills of Normandy, echoed this same nocturnal choreography. Cheese wasn't just local sustenance, it became a language, a quiet link between isolated communities. Wheels of Trappist, Cistercian, and Benedictine cheese rolled out across the continent, carrying blessings and profit with them. Still, it wasn't all sanctified serenity. Some abbots faced criticism for indulging too much. Chronicles mention monks hoarding rich cheeses while peasants starved, prompting murmurs about gluttony. Historians still argue whether these were exaggerations by jealous rivals or genuine spiritual slips. Either way, the legend of the cheese-fat monks lingered. You can almost imagine a medieval sermon, "Beware the sin of cheddar pride." A torch sputters, casting your shadow against the ancient wall. The air smells faintly of yeast, straw, and heaven. You realize that in this quiet monastery, something extraordinary is happening. Food is turning into philosophy. The monk's obsession wasn't madness, it was method, devotion expressed through curd and thyme. And as you step closer to the cauldron, the surface trembles with reflected light, like a milky mirror. In that trembling surface, you glimpse the start of 1,000 years of flavor, faith, and fermentation, each wheel of cheese, a prayer you can taste. Morning slides quietly into the cloisters, and you wake to the scent of warm milk and damp hay. A thin mist curls across the courtyard, and the bell rings again, steady, certain, ancient. You join the brothers as they file into the refectory, the dining hall. There's silence except for the scrape of benches, the shuffle of sandals, the occasional cough echoing off the stone. No idle talk, no gossip, just obedience. Even breakfast is an act of worship, and as you sit with a bowl of coarse bread and a modest wedge of cheese, you realize this isn't just a meal. It's discipline served on a wooden platter. The rule of Saint Benedict, the backbone of monastic life, orders that food must be simple and never indulgent. You weren't meant to eat for pleasure, but for function, to keep the mind sharp for prayer. Yet even within these rules, cheese slips through as a strange loophole, a comfort wrapped in restraint. Curds of obedience, you think, watching the brothers eat slowly, each bite measured, as if tasting salvation itself. See, cheese held an almost paradoxical role here. It was humble, made from whatever milk the cows gave, yet precious because of the labor it demanded. Every wheel represented hours of silent work, careful timing, and patience. In some abbeys, you'd find written instructions, "Let the Kurds rest, as the soul should rest in God." You smirk at that one. Trust monks to find spiritual metaphors in coagulated milk. Still, cheese wasn't indulgence. It was obedience made edible. When fasting laws forbade meat, cheese became the bridge, protein, without sin. But the tricky part? Medieval fasts were complex. Some orders banned all animal products. Others made exceptions for dairy. Historians still argue whether monks stretched the rules intentionally, using cheese as their secret loophole to survive long Lenten days. One 13th-century bishop complained that certain abbots took more comfort in the cow than in Christ. You imagine him wagging a finger at a brother smuggling a hunk of cheese into the library. You follow the brothers from the refectory to the workroom. There, the same patience that governs prayer governs production. The monks wash the cheese molds in steaming water, polish them with cloths, and whisper verses as they work. It's not that they think God is watching every stir of the ladle. It's that they are watching themselves, testing their humility through repetition. One mistake can ruin a wheel. Too much salt, too little pressing, a lapse in attention, and weeks of effort turn to rot. You start to feel that weight yourself, that pressure to be perfect, not just for flavor, but for faith. A brother named Anselm, stoic face, kind eyes, hands you a fresh wheel wrapped in cloth. He says, "The curd listens. When your heart is still, the cheese is kind." You laugh under your breath, thinking that must be the most medieval version of mindful cooking ever recorded. As the sun climbs, you help flip the cheeses on their wooden shelves. They glisten faintly with moisture, like pale moons in the dim cellar. Each wheel is marked with a symbol, a cross, a letter, sometimes a simple scratch. You run your finger across one carved mark and wonder what it means, a name, a date, or maybe just a prayer for good fermentation. Here's the historical fact, hidden beneath the mysticism. Monasteries weren't just spiritual sanctuaries. They were Europe's earliest controlled food labs. By the 9th century, abbeys in France, Germany, and Italy were managing entire dairy herds, experimenting with preservation, and even trading cheese for manuscripts or spices. Some of the most famous modern varieties, like Münster, Fontina, and even Parmigiano Reggiano, trace their ancestry to monastic recipes. You picture some monk, centuries ago, unknowingly inventing dinner table legends while trying to follow a fast day rule. The cellar hums with quiet life. You can almost hear the cheese breathing, the faint fizz of fermentation. To the monks, this wasn't just decay, it was transformation. Just as the soul matures through trial, milk matures through time. The discipline required, temperature control, patience, humility, reflected the very virtues they swore to embody. You notice how the day is structured like a slow recipe: prime, terce, sext, none. Each hour marked by prayer and work, each prayer marking the slow rhythm of cheese aging. The monks measured time not in minutes, but in flavors. When the rind blushes yellow, Anselm murmurs, you will know it's ready. He could be talking about spiritual readiness just as easily. A fringe tidbit drifts into your mind.
Some monasteries trained young novices to meditate by staring at a wheel of cheese for an hour, watching condensation beads gather and fall. It sounds absurd now, but the purpose was focus, to see God even in stillness. You picture yourself sitting cross-legged before a sweating cheese wheel, trying not to laugh, trying not to sneeze, trying not to think of pizza. Still, it worked. These rituals forged minds capable of patience few of us could manage today. The monk's world revolved around cycles, the seasons, the cow's milk, the waxing and waning of flavor. Everything had to be in sync. Disobedience or distraction didn't just break rules, it ruined sustenance. You begin to understand why their obsession wasn't madness, but necessity. By midday, the heat makes the courtyard smell faintly of grass and smoke. The monks rest briefly, faces turned toward the sun, eyes half closed. You think of modern life, notifications, deadlines, microwaves, and realize how alien this rhythm feels. Yet, it's comforting, predictable. Obedience here isn't punishment, it's peace. Inside, the scriptorium buzzes with quills scratching parchment. Some brothers copy hymns, others record inventories. 2 wheels for the bishop's table, 1 for the infirmary, 6 for winter. Cheese, prayer, and parchment blend seamlessly into one sacred routine. You can almost hear the faint hum of continuity, 1,000 years of the same actions, unbroken, unwavering. And yet, even in obedience, there's quiet rebellion. You hear whispers of brothers experimenting in secret, adding herbs, aging cheese longer than permitted, trying goat's milk instead of cows. Historians still argue whether monks stretched the rules intentionally, using cheese as their secret loophole to survive long Lenten days. One 13th-century bishop complained that certain abbots took more comfort in the cow than in Christ. You imagine him wagging a finger at a brother smuggling a hunk of cheese into the library. The sun sets, golden light spilling through the narrow windows. The brothers return to the refectory for supper. Thin soup, coarse bread, and once again, cheese. You notice the silence isn't oppressive, it's reverential. The act of eating is almost identical to the act of praying. Bite, pause, swallow, reflect. As you finish your small portion, you feel the deeper rhythm of this place settling in your chest. Cheese here isn't comfort food. It's obedience you can taste. Patience solidified. Devotion salted and aged. And somewhere in the dimming light, Brother Anselm nods toward you with a knowing smile. He says, "Tomorrow, we turn them again." You realize he's not just talking about the wheels. He's talking about you, about the slow curdling of your own impatience into something.
The next morning smells faintly of cool stone and ripening curd. You follow Brother Anselm down a narrow staircase spiraling into the heart of the monastery. The air thickens as you descend, damp, musky, and sharp enough to make your nose tingle. "The cellar of heaven," he whispers, and you can't tell if he's joking or confessing a truth. You step into a chamber lit only by a few flickering candles. Rows upon rows of cheese wheels stretch into the darkness, stacked neatly on wooden planks blackened by age and salt. The walls drip with condensation, the stones slick beneath your sandals,
It's like walking into another world, a subterranean cathedral where the prayers are made of milk and mold. You reach out and touch one of the wheels. The rind feels leathery, firm, but warm where your fingers rest. Life is happening here. Invisible armies of bacteria and fungi are transforming each wheel, giving them unique flavor, texture, and scent. You catch a whiff of something nutty and slightly sweet, followed by a sting of ammonia. It's oddly comforting, like the smell of rain on stone mixed with bread baking in another room. Brother Anselm explains that the cellar's temperature never changes. It's cool in summer, cold in winter. This stability is sacred. The world outside burns or freezes, he murmurs, but down here, creation continues. You nod, though your modern brain can't help thinking he's describing the earliest version of climate control. Monks were not just praying men, they were environmental engineers. Historians note that medieval monastic cellars were masterpieces of design. Builders used thick limestone to regulate humidity, dug deep for natural insulation, and sometimes redirected streams to keep air circulating. Without thermometers or charts, they learned to read the walls, the air, the sweat of their own skin. A wheel's future depended on a monk's intuition, on whether the day felt right. You try to imagine explaining that to a modern food safety inspector. As you walk deeper into the cellar, the darkness presses closer. You can hear faint dripping, the sound echoing like slow applause. Somewhere in the back, another monk hums softly as he turns a wheel. The process looks almost choreographed. Lift, turn, brush, replace. Each motion deliberate, patient, rhythmic. You find yourself breathing in sync with the movement, lulled by repetition. Anselm picks up a small wooden brush and scrubs a wheel's surface. The rind must breathe, but not gossip. You chuckle, then realize he's serious. Too much moisture and the cheese rots. Too little and it hardens to stone. Balance is everything. Obedience again, but this time applied to air. The cellar feels alive. In the dim light, you notice specks of blue-green mold creeping across a few wheels. At first, you recoil. Mold means decay, right? But Anselm shakes his head gently. This is the angel's touch. He explains that certain molds bring flavor, protecting the cheese from worse invaders. You think back to the rule of Saint Benedict and its call for humility. Maybe this is what it means, to allow even imperfection to become part of holiness. There's a story he tells as he works, one of those quiet monastery legends that never made it into history books. Centuries ago, a novice monk forgot a wheel in the cellar corner for a season too long. When he found it again, covered in strange blue veins, he panicked, thought he'd ruined it. But the abbot, curious, cut it open, tasted it, and declared it divine. Whether true or not, that story echoes through time. Some say it's the birth of blue cheese. Historians still argue whether Roquefort was truly a monk's mistake or just good marketing. Either way, you imagine that first terrified novice and silently thank him for the accident. You move through the aisles, and something dawns on you. Every wheel here is unique. Despite identical recipes, identical hands, and identical prayers, no two cheeses age the same. Slight differences in temperature, moisture, or even candle smoke alter the result. It's a quiet metaphor for faith itself, disciplined structure, giving birth to endless variation. And the irony? Monks who took vows of silence created the loudest flavors in Europe. A stray thought tickles your brain. If heaven had a buffet, it would probably smell a bit like this, earthy, tangy, faintly sinful. You grin to yourself, then immediately look around to make sure no saint heard that. Anselm pauses beside an older wheel and cuts a wedge. The knife sinks with a soft hiss. Inside, the cheese is pale gold, marbled faintly with darker veins. He offers you a slice. You hesitate. Something about eating 900-year-old tradition feels intimidating, but you take it anyway. The flavor blooms slowly, nutty, buttery, slightly smoky, and so complex you can't even name half the sensations. You exhale and whisper, "That's incredible." He smiles. "It should be. It's last year's Easter cheese." You blink. The idea of aging something for a year in silence only to eat it on one holy day seems impossibly patient. But that was the point. Monks marked time not by dates, but by flavors. Each wheel was a reminder that good things, holy things, require waiting. A quirky tidbit for you. Some abbeys even buried their finest cheeses underground during wars, marking the spots with small crosses. When peace returned, they dig them up, scrape off the mold, and feast. The flavor, they said, tasted of forgiveness. You can't decide if that's poetic or just good fermentation talking. You help Anselm turn the last of the wheels. The work leaves your hands slick and faintly greasy. He hands you a cloth to wipe them and says, "We handle them like souls, cleaned, turned, and tested." You nod, feeling the quiet weight of centuries resting in that cellar air. The candles flicker low, shadows crawl across the stone, and for a moment the cheese wheels look like halos laid out to dry. You realize that this cellar isn't just storage, it's theology rendered edible. Each wheel is a testament to time, care, and transformation. As you climb back up the spiral stairs, your body adjusts to the warmer air above ground. The monastery courtyard glows in afternoon sun. The world feels louder now. Birds, breeze, and distant bells. You look back at the cellar door and think of what's happening beneath your feet. Hundreds of small miracles slowly breathing in the dark. Historians still argue whether monastic cheesemaking was meant for divine contemplation or just clever survival strategy. But as you wipe a smear of curd from your thumb, you suspect it was both. For monks, faith and function were never separate. They were two sides of the same rind. And as you step back into the sunlight, your mind drifts to the next layer of the story, the one where faith meets economy, and cheese stops being just a prayer in the cellar and becomes the currency of holiness itself.
The bells ring again at dawn, echoing through the valley like a slow reminder that time never hurries here. You wake to the same rhythm, prayers, chores, the soft murmur of cows being milked in the mist. But today you notice something different. A group of lay brothers hauls wooden carts toward the monastery gates. The carts are loaded not with grain or books, but with heavy wheels wrapped in cloth. You follow quietly, realizing these are no longer just sacred foods. They're currency. This is the economy of holiness, the moment when quiet prayer met profit. You trail behind as the gates creak open. A merchant waits outside, his cart already half full of salt and barrels of wine. He bows low before the brothers, not out of piety, but respect. Monastic cheese was the gold standard of medieval Europe. From the Alps to Normandy, monasteries became the beating heart of rural economies. Their cheese didn't just sustain monks, it sustained villages, armies, even kings. You watch the exchange unfold, silent, precise, like liturgy with ledgers. A brother counts the coins, another marks the transaction in a worn ledger bound with calfskin. The merchant samples a wedge, nods approvingly, and leaves with his load. For a moment, the cloister feels like a marketplace dressed as a chapel. Historians note that by the 12th century, many monasteries had become Europe's most efficient business enterprises. They managed estates, vineyards, and dairies with military precision. But among all their crafts, cheese-making was uniquely reliable. It traveled well, lasted months, and could be traded for everything from parchment to pilgrimage supplies. One abbot famously joked that a well-aged cheese prays louder than a poor monk. You can almost hear him chuckle behind a goblet of wine. The idea feels almost scandalous. Holy men profiting from curds. Yet the logic was simple. To sustain their communities, they needed income. Selling cheese wasn't greed, it was grace turned tangible. You realize that every monastery wheel sold outside these walls carried a piece of prayer into the world, an edible sermon of patience and skill. Still, not everyone approved. The early Cistercians, reform-minded monks of the 12th century, worried that wealth was corrupting their brothers. They accused other orders of turning abbeys into butteries of Babylon. It's a wonderfully dramatic phrase, and you can almost see a grumpy monk scribbling it into a letter after seeing another abbot ride off on a horse fattened by cheddar. Historians still argue whether these economic ventures truly corrupted the monasteries or merely reflected practical survival. You step into the cheese workshop, where another batch of milk is being transformed. The brothers hum as they stir, but the atmosphere feels more industrious than mystical now. You notice ledgers stacked beside the vats, marked with quantities and destinations, some bound for local lords, others for distant abbeys. Each wheel is not only food, but a signature, a symbol of craftsmanship that carries the monastery's reputation. One of the monks, Brother Hugo, lifts his head and smiles. The world prays for bread, but it pays for cheese. You grin. There's a wisdom in that. Bread feeds the day, but cheese endures. Bread molds in a week. Cheese can age gracefully for years. It's no wonder kings sent messengers to monasteries when famine struck. Here's a historical fact for you. During the reign of Charlemagne, records describe monasteries sending tribute cheeses to the royal court. The emperor reportedly adored one particularly strong-smelling wheel from an Alpine abbey. When he asked how it was made, the abbot nervously explained the mold ripening process, expecting disgust. Instead, Charlemagne supposedly ordered more, declaring that a cheese that prays is a cheese that pleases. Whether apocryphal or not, that story spread through Europe like wildfire. The cheese business became so lucrative that some abbeys hired lay farmers to manage herds, offering spiritual protection in exchange for dairy quotas. A clever form of medieval outsourcing. You picture a monk with a scroll and a quill calculating butterfat percentages like an early accountant of grace. Somewhere in that math, holiness turned into export quality. But there's tension beneath the success. You overhear two brothers debating softly near the shelves. One insists that selling cheese distracts from spiritual life. The other counters that without trade, the monastery can't feed its poor. You can sense both are right. The debate mirrors every age-old human struggle: spirit, survival. Historians still argue whether monasteries lost their purity through profit or proved that labor itself can be divine. As the day warms, you help carry a few wheels into the courtyard to dry. The sun hits the linen-wrapped rounds, and their scent deepens, sweet, grassy, a little funky. Villagers gather by the gate, hoping to barter for scraps. A widow offers herbs from her garden, a shepherd wool. The monks give generously, and you see how the monastery functions as both bank and blessing. A quirky tidbit emerges from the conversation. Some monasteries use cheese as literal tithes.
Parishioners, unable to pay in coin, brought wheels to the abbey, where they'd be blessed, sold, or stored for the winter. In one record from Burgundy, a farmer owed 3 cheeses and 1 prayer per cow. You laugh. It sounds like the world's oddest subscription service. By afternoon, the abbot himself inspects the finished cheeses. His robes brush the floor, his hands surprisingly rough from work. He turns a wheel, sniffs it, nods. A good cheese, he says, is silent proof of diligence. The monks bow slightly. It's hard not to admire how seriously they take this craft. Even their economic success feels ritualistic, an extension of devotion. As you walk with the abbot through the orchard, he confides something unexpected. He says, "When I was a novice, I thought holiness meant retreat. But I've learned it also means participation, helping the world taste patience." That line sticks with you. You think of all those monks, century after century, quietly shaping European agriculture without ever leaving their cloisters. Evening falls. A faint breeze carries the smell of smoke and grass. Merchants are gone, carts empty, gates closed. Inside, the monastery feels calm again, its commercial pulse giving way to twilight chants. You realize this ebb and flow, prayer and profit, silence and commerce, wasn't contradiction, but balance. The monks managed to weave holiness into trade, turning every sale into an offering. And yet, under the chant's melody, you sense a faint warning. Wealth has a way of curdling, just like milk. Too much comfort, and faith begins to spoil. You can feel that tension building, quiet as mold under a rind. As night settles, the abbot leads Compline, the final prayer of the day. The monks' voices rise softly in Latin, echoing against stone. Their harmonies blend with the scent of ripening cheese, of earth and labor and life transformed. You can't tell where the economics end and the mysticism begins. They've fused together like curds under pressure. When the last amen fades, you step outside. The moon hangs above the hills, pale and round, like a heavenly cheese wheel itself. You laugh quietly at the thought, divinity and dairy sharing a shape. Tomorrow, you sense, the peace might fracture, because where there's pleasure, there's always prohibition. And in the centuries ahead, the monks will find themselves wrestling not just with profits, but with temptation, the kind that melts in the mouth, but weighs on the soul. The bells ring for midnight prayers, and you find yourself halfway between holiness and hunger. The refectory smells faintly of wax and sour milk, and somewhere nearby, a monk's stomach growls louder than the choir. You can't blame him. It's Lent, and food is both forbidden and fascinating. You sit on a wooden bench, hands folded, pretending piety while your eyes drift toward the kitchen door, where the faintest whiff of melted butter betrays someone's tiny rebellion. See, fasting wasn't supposed to be easy. The rules were strict. No meat, no indulgence, just fish, bread, and a whole lot of humility. But monks, clever, practical, eternally hungry monks, found loopholes. And their favorite loophole was cheese. The church never quite decided where dairy fit in the cosmic menu of sin and sanctity. Some abbots said milk was life, a symbol of divine nourishment. Others warned that its richness tempted the body too much, especially when churned into butter or aged into thick wheels of temptation. You take a slow breath, watching a young novice snake past with a jug under his robe. He's heading for the solarium, where the forbidden pleasures are kept, wheels wrapped in linen, quietly aging through the season of restraint. Historians still argue whether those monks actually broke the rules or just bent them artistically. There's a record from a 13th century council where bishops debated if cheese counted as animal flesh. The outcome? A murky maybe, which in monastic terms translated perfectly to proceed carefully and bring a knife. Here's your mainstream fact for this round. By the high Middle Ages, monasteries were among Europe's biggest dairy producers, so their influence on fasting laws was huge. The Vatican relied on monks for consistent supplies of butter, milk, and, of course, cheese. It's hard to outlaw something when it's keeping your pantry full. One pope even granted temporary dispensations to certain abbeys, allowing them to consume dairy during Lent in exchange for donations, known as the butter tax. Yes, holiness came with a surcharge. You follow the novice into the solarium. Inside, the air is cool, damp, and thick with temptation. Racks upon racks of cheeses rest like silent sinners, each round exhaling slow perfume into the shadows. The novice kneels, crosses himself, and lifts a small wheel to his nose. You watch him break a piece off and slip it under his tongue, eyes fluttering shut in quiet ecstasy. It's strangely intimate, more prayer than crime. You almost want to join him, but one bite might ruin your afterlife. There's a fringe tidbit that floats through old chronicles. Some monks reportedly used cheese as a test of obedience. During Lent, abbots would deliberately place a wedge in plain sight just to see who'd falter. The results were, predictably, mixed. One order supposedly solved the problem by labeling their cheeses as spiritual medicine, claiming that since monks needed strength to pray, dairy was technically divine fuel. You have to admire the logic. You sit beside a candle and glance at a faded parchment on the wall, a list of dietary rules annotated with desperate edits. Someone scribbled, "except on feast days," after nearly every restriction. You can almost hear the negotiations that went on in this very hall. Surely, Brother Matthias, a little butter in the porridge isn't a sin if it keeps us from fainting mid-psalm. Medieval theology was less about absolute virtue and more about calorie management disguised as penance. You reach for your cup of thin ale, take a sip, and try to imagine how it felt, living between guilt and gratitude, every meal a moral riddle. Even now you sense the tension. Cheese wasn't just food, it was a mirror of the body's stubbornness, the soul's slippery discipline. Maybe that's why they loved it so much. It represented everything they wrestled with daily: pleasure, decay, endurance. Historians still debate the emotional tone of those fasts. Were monks truly starving in the name of heaven, or were they low-key feasting on secret dairy under the guise of humility? Some archaeological digs around abbey kitchens show surprising amounts of animal fat residue, hinting that maybe someone's conscience was more flexible than the rulebook. You wander deeper into the cellar and notice something odd: a single wheel of cheese carved with strange symbols, crosses, stars, and what looks suspiciously like a tiny smiley face. The monk beside you notices your curiosity. "Ah, that one's for Saint Benedict. We eat it only when the rules bend." He grins, clearly pleased with his wordplay. You realize humor was another way they survived deprivation. After all, it's hard to sin if you're laughing about it. In a corner, a frail monk sits by a brazier, melting scraps of cheese into broth. He waves you over, offering a spoonful. "It's not eating, it's sipping," he insists. You taste it, and it's divine. Salty, silky, scandalous. He winks, and you both pretend you didn't just share a theological crime. Another record drifts into your mind, one of those weird footnotes in food history. In some northern monasteries, where winters were brutal, monks got papal permission to swap fasting rules for survival. They'd mix cheese and beer into a paste called pottage of virtue. Allegedly, it was light enough for Lent, though any modern dietitian would disagree violently. You catch yourself smiling. These were men of prayer, yes, but also pragmatists, improvisers, and masters of culinary loopholes. Their relationship with food was like their relationship with faith, full of contradictions, creativity, and the occasional melted edge. Suddenly, the abbot's voice echoes through the hall. "Brothers, remember, temptation begins with the tongue." The novice beside you freezes mid-bite. You both suppress nervous laughter. The abbot's tone softens. "But blessed are those who share in moderation." And just like that, the tension dissolves. The monks resume their quiet chewing, pretending it's just another form of meditation. You look around at the flickering candles, the slow drips of whey from fresh rounds, and the whispers of relief in the room. You realize the truth no rule book could capture. Fasting wasn't about denying life. It was about savoring it more deeply. By craving, they learned reverence. By breaking small rules, they rediscovered humanity. The abbot finishes his inspection, blesses the cellar, and extinguishes his lamp. Darkness folds around you like cool cloth. Somewhere in the blackness, someone burps softly. Holiness achieved. As you climb the spiral stairs back toward the moonlit courtyard, you can still taste the faint tang of forbidden cheese on your tongue. You feel oddly serene. Maybe sin, like fermentation, just needs time to mature into understanding. You whisper a half prayer to no one in particular. "Forgive me, Father, for I have snacked." The wind outside smells faintly of hay and smoke. Somewhere a cow low moos at the moon, and you swear it sounds approving. You crouch beside a bubbling cauldron that smells faintly of hay, candle smoke, and something strangely holy. The monk beside you stirs slowly, his wooden paddles slicing through creamy currents that shimmer in the dim torchlight. He's humming, not a tune exactly, more like a prayer that forgot its words halfway through. You lean closer, and he winks, whispering, "Cheese is God's way of turning patience into flavor." You're not sure if that's theology or hunger talking, but it fits the vibe perfectly. The air is thick and alive, like the cauldron itself is breathing. You realize you're watching what many called the alchemy of faith. Back in the 12th century, long before chemistry textbooks or stainless steel vats, monks saw curdling as a holy mystery. Milk, white as purity, fleeting as sin, transformed into something solid, nourishing, eternal. It was a small miracle they could replicate daily, and that gave them power. Not fire or gold, but the quiet kind, controlled over nature, guided by devotion. You run your finger along the table's waxed edge, tracing strange marks carved into the wood, symbols for temperature, humidity, and time. This, the monk says, is their book of milk, though not written in ink. Each mark tells how long to stir, how much salt to bless the curds with, when to turn them, when to trust that mold will appear. He laughs when you ask about the mold. Apparently some monks genuinely believed those blue-green veins were divine signatures, proof that angels preferred penicillium to parchment. You can almost hear the debates echoing across centuries. Historians still argue whether these molds were seen as literal miracles or just bragging rights for superior technique. Some say monks encouraged the natural spores from cave air, knowing full well what they were doing. Others think it was accidental, blessed accidents that got mythologized into divine intervention. Either way, it worked, and it smelled potent. You lean closer to a ripening wheel on a wooden rack. Its rind glows faintly in the candlelight, as if lit from within. He calls it the living crust, and he isn't exaggerating. Tiny life forms, yeasts, bacteria, molds, are sculpting it, hour by hour, into layers of taste and texture that no recipe could repeat. You breathe in, earthy, nutty, slightly foot-like. He catches your grimace and chuckles softly. "Every saint has a stench," he says. You laugh too, but also kind of believe him. Here's your mainstream fact for the night. Many famous European cheeses, think Parmesan, Gruyere, and Roquefort, owe their origins to monastic experiments. These monks weren't just praying, they were early food scientists, tweaking curd sizes, salting ratios, and fermentation times. They learned that air from one valley produced a sharper flavor, while air from another created something milder, creamier. Geography, it turned out, was a secret ingredient. And yet, amid all that precision, superstition thrived. Some abbeys swore that only milk from cows fed within sight of a chapel bell could yield holy cheese. Others kept specific starter curds for generations, believing each batch contained ancestral blessings. There's even a fringe tidbit historians love to retell. A certain French monastery supposedly Christianed each wheel of cheese before sealing it, sprinkling holy water on top, and giving it a saint's name for protection. Saint Brie, pray for us. You watch as the monk tilts the cauldron, pouring the fresh curds into woven molds lined with muslin. His movements are reverent, rhythmic. Drip by drip, whey trickles away, leaving behind soft, trembling rounds of promise. The room hums with a kind of patience that modern life can't replicate. You think about your own fridge, fast, cold, sterile, and realize this cellar is its opposite. Warm, damp, alive. Time itself is an ingredient here. He shows you a small clay jar filled with strange gray fuzz. The spores, he explains. We found them on cave walls years ago. They do the work we can't see. You imagine medieval monks scraping mold like treasure, sprinkling it onto their cheeses as though sowing seeds of grace. Some even experimented with cross-contamination, sharing cultures between abbeys, believing flavor itself could be a form of communion. There's one particular debate the monk mentions, whispered among cheese historians even now. Did monks intentionally invent blue cheese, or did nature surprise them? Some claim it was an accident, a forgotten wheel left in a cave, spores sneaking in through cracks. Others insist the monks knew exactly what they were doing, harnessing the local microflora long before science had a name for it. Either way, the result was a taste that could stop a sermon mid-sentence. You take a bite, cautiously. It's tangy, salty and haunting. The flavor lingers like incense, slow, smoky, impossible to forget. You almost understand why they treated this as proof of divine favor. The monk smiles knowingly and offers you bread to chase it down. You joke that this would go great on a charcuterie board, and he stares blankly, as if you've just named a heresy. As you sit there, crumbs in hand, you start to see the deeper truth. Cheese-making was theology made edible. Each transformation, liquid to solid, bland to complex, mirrored the spiritual journey monks sought, to purify through pressure, to mature in silence, to bloom in darkness. Cheese was meditation that could be sliced and shared. A rat scurries past your boot. The monk doesn't flinch. He nods at it like an old friend. He says, "They eat what we cannot. Waste is sin." And there it is again, the constant moral framing. Even mold had meaning. Every speck of spoilage, every crusty edge was a metaphor for the balance between decay and renewal. As you prepare to leave the cellar, the monk hands you a small wedge wrapped in cloth. "Take it," he murmurs. "It will remind you that even what spoils has purpose." You tuck it into your coat pocket, half worried it'll stink up your soul on the way home. Above ground, night settles heavy over the cloister roofs. The moon gleams like a pale wheel of cheese itself, a celestial brie rolling slowly across the heavens. You laugh quietly at the thought, but the parallel is irresistible. Maybe, you think, the monks saw the same thing and decided that heaven must smell faintly of dairy. You walk past a wall etched with faint Latin graffiti, a recipe maybe, or a prayer. The words translate roughly to, "Patience is flavor." You run your fingers over them, feeling the indentations left by centuries of devotion and a little bit of hunger. Back in your head, the modern world hums faintly. You imagine telling your friends you spent an evening learning that monks were early microbiologists who believed blue mold was angel dust. They'd probably laugh, but you'd know the truth. that behind every bite of cheese lies a quiet faith in time, transformation, and just enough decay to make life delicious.
The morning sun slants through stained glass, painting the cloistered floor in pools of gold and crimson. You step carefully between the colors, half awake, half mesmerized, as the scent of bread and warm milk drifts from the kitchens. The monks are already working, kneading dough, polishing brass, and of course, tending to cheese. You'd think they'd get tired of it. But no, cheese wasn't just food here, it was a calling. And lately, it had gone on a pilgrimage of its own. You follow Brother Etienne as he loads wooden crates onto a cart. Inside, neat wheels of cheese wrapped in waxed cloth and marked with the abbey's seal. They're heading for Rome, or at least that's what he says with quiet pride. The monastery's cheese has become famous enough that even papal couriers stop by for a taste. His Holiness likes it with honey, the monk murmurs, like sharing a state secret. The road outside the abbey is muddy, the kind of brown-gray slop that could swallow a shoe whole. But it's alive with travelers. Pilgrims, peddlers, and priests, all heading somewhere holier than where they came from. You climb into the cart and feel it jolt forward, wheels creaking like the bones of ancient saints. Ahead lies the trade route that carried not just goods, but gossip, relics, and recipes. Here's your mainstream fact for the road. Monasteries didn't just consume cheese, they exported it across medieval Europe. Abbeys like Citeaux, Cluny, and La Trappe built reputations on their cheese-making skills. Some even became early brand names. Their products fed nobles, popes, and weary pilgrims alike. A wheel of monastic cheese could travel hundreds of miles, wrapped tight, lasting through weather, wars, and moral fatigue. It was portable holiness. You pass a group of barefoot pilgrims chanting quietly. They're heading for Santiago de Compostela, the road lined with shrines and markets. One of them spots the cart and asks if you'll trade a small slice. Brother Etienne breaks off a piece and hands it over without hesitation. For strength, he says. The pilgrim bows deeply before eating, as if accepting communion. You watch his face soften, the taste of faith and fat mingling perfectly. There's a fringe tidbit about this very journey. Some chroniclers mention that pilgrims often used cheese as a kind of currency. It was compact, valuable, and, unlike money, could fill an empty stomach. On the Camino routes, cheese for shelter was a common trade. Some monasteries even gave pilgrims special rations, wedges of blessed cheese wrapped in cloth embroidered with a cross. To eat it was to carry a piece of the monastery's blessing in your belly. You can almost imagine the marketing pitch. Travel light, sin less, eat Gouda. As the cart rattles along, you notice the monks' efficiency. Every stop is planned. One abbey takes a half a crate and swaps it for dried figs. A nunnery further down trades wine for wheels, the nuns giggling behind veils like conspirators. For the infirmary, she insists, though you suspect otherwise. It's a quiet, underground network of dairy diplomacy. Historians still argue whether this spread of cheese culture was intentional evangelism or just good business. Were the monks spreading faith through flavor or simply funding their abbeys one curd at a time? Maybe both. Cheese had a way of making holiness taste approachable. A peasant might not afford scripture, but a crumb of monastic cheese gave him a literal taste of divine craftsmanship. You stop at a roadside tavern, half church, half chaos. Pilgrims snore in corners, merchants argue about tolls, and on the counter sits a small wheel of cheese carved with the Benedictine cross. The innkeeper boasts that it came from the Holy Brothers of Turnus, but you can tell he's lying. It's clearly from Cluny. Brother Etienne just smiles, amused. Imitation, he says softly, is the sincerest form of salvation. Later that day, you reach a bustling fairground near a river crossing. Merchants shout over the noise, offering silk, salt, and spice, but it's the cheese stall that draws a crowd. Wheels of every size gleam like golden halos under the sun.
You hear someone call out, "Try the monk's cheese, a bite of paradise, aged to perfection." You laugh quietly. Apparently holiness now comes in half-pound portions. You taste a few samples. Some are sharp enough to make your eyes water, others smooth as buttered hymns. One, streaked with veins of blue, tastes faintly of earth and thunder. The seller explains it came from a cave near Rocamadour, where monks believe the air itself is blessed. You nod appreciatively, and wonder if that blessing includes mild stomach cramps later. As evening falls, your cart finally reaches a small monastery perched above the river. The air smells of lavender and smoke. Inside, the guest house is full of travelers, soldiers, scholars, and one tired papal messenger who insists on storing his cheese parcel in the chapel for safekeeping. You glance at Brother Etienne. He just shrugs. God protects what feeds his servants. After dinner, the monks gather for compline. Their voices echo off the stone, low and steady, while outside, a pair of traders count coins under the same moon that once shone over Citeaux. The world spins quietly around the rhythm of faith and food. Somewhere in the dark, a pilgrim chews his last piece of cheese and whispers a thank you that probably doubles as grace. There's one final anecdote before the night deepens, a story you overhear from an elderly monk. He tells of a pope who supposedly declared cheese the most convenient miracle. When questioned, he smiled and said, "Because it keeps." You can't tell if that's a joke or doctrine, but either way, it's perfect. You drift to sleep in the guest house, surrounded by crates of cheese and the muffled snores of holy men. Outside, the river murmurs softly, carrying crumbs of moonlight downstream. You think of all the wheels traveling roads and seas, small, edible sermons rolling from abbey to abbey, keeping faith alive in bite-sized form. And just before you fade out, a thought slips quietly through your mind. Maybe salvation isn't a grand event, but a slow process, like fermentation, steady and unseen, turning humble milk into something worth remembering.
The first chill of autumn creeps into the cloister, curling around your ankles as you wander past the refectory door. The monks are quieter now. Something's brewing, and it's not another vat of milk. You hear whispers of reform, of men in robes arguing not about God, but about butter. Yes, butter. You didn't mishear. Somewhere in the twisting corridors of power and prayer, cheese has become political. You stop beside a stone archway where two monks are debating in low, urgent voices. "Brother," says the older one, "we are gluttons. We drown our virtue in curds and cream." The younger monk frowns, clutching his ladle like a relic. "But we feed the poor with our work. Our cheese sustains pilgrims, the sick, even the bishop himself." The older monk sighs. A sin wrapped in service is still a sin. And just like that, you're eavesdropping on the medieval version of a food ethics seminar. This is the 15th century, when whispers of change ripple through monasteries like a draught under the door. Reformers are rising, calling for stricter discipline and fewer indulgences. And indulgences, apparently, now includes brie. You trail them into the courtyard. A crowd of monks has gathered around a traveling preacher. He's fiery, lean, and definitely not impressed by the abbey's dairy output. While the poor starve, you dine on wheels of fat and call it prayer. His words cut through the crisp air like a cleaver through curd. Some monks bow their heads, others glare daggers. Here's your mainstream fact for this section. By the late Middle Ages, many monasteries had grown wealthy from cheese production. Their lands, cows, and markets gave them steady income even as famine struck surrounding villages. This prosperity fueled resentment, especially among reformers who felt monastic life had become too comfortable. In Germany, France, and Italy, some abbeys were even accused of cheese hoarding, a term that sounds ridiculous
until you remember people were starving outside their gates. You wander into the dairy house, now half deserted. A few monks still stir curds, but they work in silence. One of them, Brother Alaric, leans close and whispers, "They say our cheese tempts even the pious, that it fattens pride faster than the body." You glance at his waistline and raise an eyebrow. He chuckles. Well, perhaps both. The reforms spreading through Europe weren't just about food, they were about control. What monks ate became a reflection of their soul's condition. Cheese, with its richness and slow luxury, symbolized everything reformers thought had gone wrong: indulgence, excess, comfort. Some abbots fought back, insisting that moderation, not abstinence, was the true virtue. Others surrendered, selling off dairy herds and fasting harder than ever. Historians still argue whether these reforms were sincere or political. Was it really about spiritual purity or just a power struggle dressed in piety? The line between holiness and hypocrisy was as thin as a cheesecloth. You find yourself in the scriptorium later that day. The air smells of ink and regret. One monk is copying a sermon denouncing dairy. Another is illustrating a manuscript margin with a cow wearing a halo. Quiet rebellion lives even in the margins, you realize. The illustrator glances up and mutters, "If they take the cheese, what joy remains?" You can't tell if he's joking or grieving. Here's a fringe tidbit. During one reform council, a certain abbot famously declared that cheese corrupts humility through pleasure. In response, another monk sent him an anonymous gift, the small wheel labeled "Humility," aged 12 months. No one confessed, but the rumor alone became legend. Outside, tension thickens. The monastery's cheese cellar is locked for the first time in decades. Rumor says reformers plan to confiscate the wheels and donate them to nearby villages. The younger monks are furious. The older ones, resigned. You sneak a glance through the barred door and see rows of cheeses aging in silence, like prisoners awaiting judgment. At dinner, instead of cheese, the monks receive bowls of thin vegetable stew. The taste of obedience, apparently. No one complains aloud, but you can sense the bitterness. Food has always been more than sustenance here. It's identity, culture, theology. Taking away cheese is like erasing half the monastery's memory. That night, you wander the halls and catch the faintest scent of melted butter. You follow it to a tiny room near the kitchen. A few rebels have gathered, whispering over a hidden skillet. They're frying curds in silence, eyes shining with guilt and delight. When they spot you, one grins nervously. "Care to join our heresy?" You decline, barely. They eat slowly, reverently, as though tasting something sacred and doomed. One murmurs, "They can take our parchment, our bells, our cows, but not the flavor of patience." You almost clap, but you're afraid it would echo too loudly. By morning, the air in the abbey feels different, lighter, emptier. The preacher has moved on, leaving behind rules, rumors, and a strange melancholy. Brother Alaric tells you the abbey will reduce its dairy output. "We must prove we are pure," he says, though his voice lacks conviction. You glance at the barns, half the cows already sold, their lowing fading into distance. You help him carry the last few wheels to the cellar. As he stacks them, he sighs. "We thought we could turn milk into holiness. Now they tell us holiness must be flavorless." You nod, unsure how to comfort a man grieving curds. Historians today still debate what was lost in those reforms. Did austerity renew the church's spirit, or did it drain away the creative joy that once lived in monastic life? Some say those centuries of cheesemaking were Europe's first quiet revolution, proof that faith could ferment into art.
Others claimed it was just gluttony in disguise. You suspect the truth, as always, lies somewhere between hunger and hope. As the sun sets, you stand at the cloister window, watching mist roll over the pastures once filled with cows. A few monks still hum softly, working the churns in secret. Change has come, but tradition lingers like the scent of milk in stone. You rest your hand on the cold window ledge and realize the real battle was never about cheese. It was about whether holiness should taste like sacrifice or satisfaction. In the distance, thunder murmurs, echoing like the low rumble of a hungry stomach. Winter arrives with a soft, gray quiet, dusting the monastery roofs and filling the courtyards with the smell of frost and smoke. You trudge through snow-dusted paths, feeling the chill bite through your cloak, but the dairy house is warm, glowing with golden light and the henny aroma of fermenting wheels. The monks move with deliberate care, each gesture a mixture of devotion and necessity, turning, brushing, and salting the curds as though coaxing holiness from milk itself. You notice that even in winter, the abbey hums with purpose. Cheese isn't just a wintertime luxury, it's survival. Supplies are low, the harvest is dwindling, and the monks' cheeses, carefully aged through autumn, will sustain both them and the nearby villagers. You remember that night you saw pilgrims trading cheese for shelter. Now this same product is quietly keeping lives warm through snow and hunger. There's something profoundly humbling in the way nourishment doubles as devotion. Historians note that medieval monasteries were remarkably self-sufficient during winter. Dairy products, preserved grains, and salted meats allowed these communities to endure months of isolation. Cheese, in particular, was crucial. It was dense, portable, and long-lasting. Unlike bread, which could mold in days, a well-aged wheat could survive harsh months, providing sustenance when the frozen world outside offered little. The monks weren't just crafting flavor, they were crafting resilience. As you wander through the cellar, a subtle, almost imperceptible change catches your attention. The molds and bacteria previously content with gentle aging now seem to move more aggressively. The cold slows them, but doesn't stop them. Each wheel is subtly different, developing flavors that could only emerge from frost-kissed air and stone walls. You touch a blue-veined wheel and marvel at how the chill hasn't dulled its complexity. Nature, you realize, is as much a collaborator as the monks themselves. A fringe tidbit emerges from whispered chronicles. Some monks believed the cold season was a form of divine testing. Cheese that matured correctly through winter was considered particularly blessed. One bite could fortify both body and soul. Wheels that cracked or spoiled were discarded, or, in some cases, buried in the snow to return to God. You shiver slightly, imagining the eerie woes of abandoned rounds, half hidden beneath frost, waiting for spring's mercy. You hear a soft laugh echo through the cellar. Brother Remy, usually stern and silent, is tasting a wedge of a particularly pungent blue cheese. "It's stronger than my prayers," he whispers. You chuckle, and he winks. Humor, you realize, is the secret ingredient that survives every winter, every reform, every fast. Even in strict obedience, joy finds a way. Historians still argue whether winter cheeses developed unique flavors due to intentional practice or accidental circumstance. Some researchers claim that monks carefully controlled humidity and airflow to achieve seasonal profiles. Others argue that the variations were mostly serendipitous, a product of ambient conditions, cave-like cellars, and the unpredictable temperaments of microbial life. You take a small bite of a wheel yourself and decide that either explanation is fine as long as it tastes divine. Outside, the snow muffles all sound.
You step into the courtyard and notice a few monks shoveling paths, their breath misting in the cold. Their shadows stretch long in the moonlight, creating a surreal dance that mirrors the curves of cheese wheels aging below. You marvel at how the monastery balances labor, prayer, and craft. Even in the harshest season, life continues, slow, deliberate, and sacred. You pass the infirmary, where a small tray holds thin slices of cheese beside bowls of gruel. Patients eat quietly, savoring every morsel. The monks explain that cheese isn't just sustenance, it's medicine, energy, and comfort. One patient, too frail to speak, smiles faintly as he tastes a wedge, and you realize that in this monastery, nutrition is itself an act of compassion. A quirky historical tidbit: some abbeys used cheese to barter with wandering merchants even in midwinter. Frozen rivers didn't stop trade. A wheel of Parmesan or a slab of aged brie could travel miles over snow-packed roads, exchanged for grain, salt, or firewood. The monks became not just spiritual guides, but logistical geniuses, mediators between harsh winter and human need. You wander back to the main hall as evening descends. The fire crackles, throwing flickering shadows across stone walls. Monks hum softly, finishing their day's work. You realize that in this rhythm, prayer, toil, aging, tasting, time itself seems suspended. Winter is not an enemy here, it is another ingredient, another chapter in the ongoing alchemy of milk into sustenance, flavor, and devotion. The last candle guttering, you step outside and gaze at the snow-covered hills. The silence is profound, broken only by the distant lowing of a cow and the faint drip of icicles. It strikes you that this world, so cold, so quiet, so disciplined, is also intensely alive. Every wheel of cheese, every careful turn, every winter fast is a testament to patience, endurance, and the subtle miracles of daily life. You take a deep breath, tasting the faint tang of the monastery in the crisp night air, and understand that even in the bleakest season, there is warmth, flavor, and meaning quietly fermented under stone and snow.
Spring seeps into the monastery with a hesitant warmth, melting frost from the courtyard stones and coaxing the first green shoots from the gardens. You trudge along the paths, your boots squelching in mud that smells faintly of new growth and cow dung, a scent that in this place feels almost sacred. The monks move with renewed energy, tending to animals, turning curds, and polishing the brass bells that will soon call them to matins. It's the season of renewal, and you can feel it in every heartbeat, every breath. The dairy house is alive with motion. Vats of milk glistened in the morning sun, curds wobbly and fragrant as the monks stir them with devotion-honed precision. You linger at a corner, watching Brother Lucien carefully slice a large wheel, murmuring prayers as he does. There's a rhythm here, something ancient, slow, comforting. Cheesemaking is no longer just sustenance or income. It is a meditation, a bridge between earth, animal, and spirit. Historians remind us that spring was critical for monastic dairies. After long winters, fresh milk returned, and the first buttered churn from spring milk was prized for its richness. Abbeys often held celebratory meals featuring these first cheeses, honoring both the season and the labor that had carried them through months of scarcity. Monks saw in the turning of the seasons a divine pattern, mirrored in the transformation of milk to curd to wheel. A quirky tidbit: some abbeys believed that cows giving milk in spring were imbued with extra spiritual energy. They whispered to their herds, blessing the udders before milking. Scholars still argue whether these practices were symbolic, superstitious, or somehow effective in enhancing flavor. Either way, you can't help but smile at the thought of monks holding tiny sermons over cows. You step outside to the pastures where the animals graze. The sun warms your face, and the scent of wet grass mingles with faint traces of aging cheese carried by the wind. Birds dart overhead, alert to every movement, and somewhere a donkey brays lazily. You realize the world beyond the abbey walls has been quietly shaped by these men and their curds. Cheese is not just food, it is culture, economy, ritual, and subtle diplomacy rolled into a wheel. Inside the cellar, monks wrap and label cheeses destined for towns, monasteries, and markets. The air hums with a mixture of warmth, humidity, and faint pungency. One monk jokes that the stronger the aroma, the more holy the wheel. You chuckle, thinking of all the centuries of whispered secrets, experiments, and small rebellions that have gone into perfecting this craft. Cheese, in this way, is both a literal and metaphorical legacy. You notice a group of novices examining the curds, their fingers trembling with excitement and reverence. One whispers, "It's like tasting patience." You nod. Patience, after all, is the secret ingredient. Months of aging, turning, and waiting culminate in these moments, teaching more than any sermon could. Discipline, observation, and care are divine in their own way. Historians still debate whether the monks' meticulous attention to detail was motivated by devotion, survival, or a combination of both. Perhaps, you muse, the beauty lies in the ambiguity. Faith and practicality, spirituality and science, all kneading together like curd under a wooden paddle. As evening approaches, the abbey bell rings for vespers. The monks gather in the chapel, and their voices rise, low and steady, blending with the smells of spring, milk, and stone. You can almost taste the devotion as it hangs in the air, a complex flavor of human effort and divine patience. The cheese wheels age quietly below, their rinds forming slowly, invisibly, like a promise. You step outside, the sun dipping behind the hills. The pastures shimmer with dew, cows chewing placidly, and somewhere in the distance a donkey brays lazily. You realize the world beyond the abbey walls has been quietly shaped by these men and their curds. Cheese is not just food, but culture, economy, ritual, and subtle diplomacy rolled into a wheel. In this serene moment, you understand the essence of the monk's obsession. Cheese wasn't merely food, it was discipline, devotion, and delight. A tangible expression of faith that could be touched, smelled, and savored. It carried centuries of knowledge, patience, and human curiosity, offering a small, edible bridge between the mundane and the divine. You take a deep breath, letting the scent of spring and stone fill your lungs. Somewhere, in a quiet corner of the abbey, a monk hums softly, turning curds with careful hands. The world feels vast, slow, and alive, and you, for a fleeting moment, taste eternity in the curve of a wheel. The sun sinks lower, painting the hills with soft amber light, and you pause, letting the day dissolve slowly around you. The sounds of the monastery soften, the low murmur of monks tending fires, the distant clatter of tools, the faint drip of melting snow in the courtyard. Everything feels gentle, deliberate, measured, as though the world itself is exhaling. You feel the pull of sleep in your limbs, but you linger a little longer, savoring the calm. Your mind drifts over the centuries you've witnessed, the quiet dedication of brothers stirring curds, the clandestine nibbling of forbidden cheese, the carefully traded wheels journeying through snow, mud, and sun. You realize that all these small acts, labor, patience, devotion, have been weaving a tapestry far larger than any individual life. Cheese was never merely sustenance. It was a medium through which faith, culture, and humanity flowed, quietly shaping the lives of countless people. Outside, the pastures are still, the cows huddled in the cool grass, the air carrying a hint of earth, hay, and aging dairy. The abbey walls, worn smooth by centuries of weather and worship, seem to hum with memory.
You imagine the countless hands that molded, pressed, and wrapped each wheel, the prayers whispered over vats, the tiny rebellions and subtle humor tucked into the margins of monastic life. All of it survives in the smell of the air, the texture of a rind, the faint echo of a chant. As you settle down, letting your body sink into the quiet, the world feels safe, slow, and luminous. Time stretches and softens, and you understand the monk's obsession. This humble labor transforms the ordinary into something sacred, something lasting. There is comfort in the rhythm of work, in patience, in the small, repeated miracles of daily life. You close your eyes, letting the final aroma of aged cheese, earth, and devotion linger, knowing that for just a moment, you too have been part of this enduring, quiet magic.